I had heard horror stories about power-hungry HOAs before, but I never thought I'd be living one. And I certainly never imagined my sister would end up tasered in my own home over a guest parking violation. It started with a bright yellow notice stuck to my front door, its bold red lettering impossible to miss. Violation approved, unauthorized guest parking, $50 fine. I ripped it down just as my sister, Charlie, pulled into the driveway. She stepped out of her car, still in her usual sleek business suit, her dark hair swept into a perfect low bun, looking like she had just stepped out of a courtroom. "You won't believe this," I said, waving the notice at her. "The HOA's already finding reasons to fine us." Charlie barely glanced at it and let out a soft chuckle. Classic power trip. "I'll just park on the street from now on." That was Charlie, always calm, always logical. I envied how nothing ever seemed to rattle her. But something about this felt personal. I had lived in Pinecrest Gardens for 3 years without any major issues. Sure, the HOA was strict, but I followed the rules, paid my dues, and kept my yard tidy. But suddenly, with Charlie staying at my place for just 2 weeks while her new house was being renovated, I was a target. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, I caught Victoria Dawson, the HOA president, standing on the sidewalk in front of my house taking photos. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She pointed her phone at my yard like a real estate appraiser, snapping shots of my mailbox, my porch, my driveway. When she noticed me watching, she didn't look away. She simply raised a hand and gave me a smug little wave. That evening, the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch were Victoria and Greg Whitman, the HOA treasurer. Both wore matching navy blue blazers with gold Pinecrest Gardens HOA pins, as if they were government officials rather than two middle-aged busybodies with too much time on their hands. "We need to discuss your growing list of violations," Victoria said sweetly, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. I frowned. Growing list? It was just one parking notice. Greg tapped on his tablet screen and started reading aloud, his monotone voice dripping with authority. "Unauthorized guest parking, $50. Improper trash bin placement, $75. Unapproved vehicle in driveway, $100. Unauthorized wind chimes, $75. I blinked. Wind chimes? Victoria smiled. The bylaw against noise-making decorations was passed last month. Page 47 of the updated guidelines. You did read the new manual, didn't you? My patience was wearing thin. My trash bins are exactly where they've always been. They must be precisely 6 inches from the side of the house, Greg said, adjusting his glasses. Yours are 8 inches out. I measured personally. At that moment, Charlie appeared behind me. Is there something I can help with? Victoria's smile faltered. And you are? My sister. Not a guest, Charlie said smoothly, folding her arms. I'm staying here temporarily while my house is being renovated. Victoria's lips curled in delight. Any stay over 10 days requires board approval, she announced. That's another $150 fine. A slow, tight pressure built in my chest. This is getting out of hand. Rules are rules, Greg said with a shrug. Payment is due in 48 hours. After that, it doubles. Victoria handed me a printed bill totaling $450. Then, as they turned to leave, I caught Victoria whispering something to Greg. He chuckled, throwing a glance back at my house before shaking his head. Charlie placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't let them get to you, she murmured. This kind of petty tyranny is more common than you think. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Then, at 2 a.m., a car door slammed outside. I peeked through my blinds just in time to see Greg placing something on my mailbox. When he was gone, I rushed outside and found another violation notice. Unapproved exterior lighting, $100 fine. My porch light. The same one I had since moving in. By morning, I wasn't the only one. 3 more neighbors had received similar bogus violations. One woman, Sue Langford, was fuming as we met at the mailboxes. "You want to know why this is happening?" she muttered. "Victoria's husband works for Westbridge Property Group. They've been buying up houses in neighborhoods just like ours. This is what they do, push people out, one fine at a time." From my kitchen window, I watched as Victoria and Greg walked down the street, pointing at houses and making notes. When they reached my driveway, Victoria pulled out a measuring tape and ran it from my mailbox to the curb. Then she smiled and wrote something down. This wasn't about rules. This was a setup. And they had no idea they had just messed with the wrong family. The next morning, I woke up to a horror show in my own front yard. Bright orange violation flags were planted everywhere, at least a dozen of them, each labeled with a different bogus infraction. Grass too tall. Unapproved plant species. Decorative rock placement violation. I stepped outside, rubbing my temples, and felt my blood pressure spike when I saw Victoria watching me from her window, coffee cup in hand. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She just smiled wider. What she didn't see was Charlie standing behind me, taking photos of everything. Her phone automatically timestamped and geotagged every image, creating an ironclad record of this harassment. Down the street, my neighbor Mark waved me over. "They got me too," he muttered, holding up his own stack of violations. "They're saying my American flag is mounted at an unapproved angle. What does that even mean?" By noon, I had counted at least 7 more neighbors hit with fines. Walt Henderson, our elderly veteran neighbor, looked shaken. He had just received a $5,000 fine for his bird bath. "They said it's an unapproved water feature," he whispered. "But I've had it for 20 years." Jess Morales, the single mom 2 streets over, was on the verge of tears. "They threatened to put a lien on my house because my kids left their bikes in the driveway," she said, holding up a notice demanding $1,200. It was happening everywhere. Systematic. Cruel. Deliberate. Charlie was silent as we walked back to my house, but I could see the calculations spinning in her head. As soon as we stepped inside, she grabbed her laptop and pulled up county property records. "Let's see what Westbridge Property Group has been up to," she murmured. Within minutes, she found it. 6 homes had already been sold in the past 3 months, and all to shell companies linked to Westbridge. Worse, the houses getting the most violations? They were right next to those already sold. Charlie exhaled sharply. This is a classic predatory development strategy. Harass homeowners with impossible rules, force them to sell, then flip the properties for a massive profit. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. So the HOA isn't just being petty. They're trying to drive us out. Charlie nodded. And we just caught them in the act. That afternoon, I spotted Victoria and Greg patrolling the neighborhood again, pointing at homes, whispering, and taking notes. When they reached my driveway, Victoria pulled out a measuring tape and started marking distances from my mailbox to the curb. Greg grinned as he jotted something down. Charlie snapped another photo. They're planting new violations right in front of us. By evening, the retaliation escalated. I was about to start dinner when I heard a loud mechanical rumbling outside. I ran to the window just in time to see a massive tow truck backing up to Charlie's car, its flashing lights reflecting off the pavement. 2 men in uniforms were attaching chains to her tires, while Victoria stood nearby, arms folded, watching with the smug satisfaction of a queen surveying her kingdom. I bolted outside. "Stop. That car is legally parked on a public street." One of the tow operators shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we have authorization from the HOA to remove this vehicle." Charlie stepped beside me, cool and composed as ever. The HOA has no authority over public streets, she said. If you don't unhook my car immediately, I'll be calling the police. Victoria stepped forward, smirking. Actually, we do have authority, she purred. This section of street was deeded to the HOA in the original community plan. Page 118 of the covenants. She handed me a document with an official-looking stamp. Plus, since your sister is an unauthorized resident, the total fine is now $650, due immediately. I clenched my fists, my pulse roaring in my ears. This isn't right. Greg shrugged, his expression eerily similar to hers. Rules are rules. We watched, helpless, as Charlie's car was towed away. When I turned back toward my house, I spotted another violation notice stuck to my door. Unsightly yard decorations, $200 fine. My jaw tightened. It was a fine for the violation flags they had planted themselves. Inside, I grabbed my phone and called Charlie. They towed your car, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I know, she said. I got an alert from my tracking app. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, something cold and sharp. Don't worry about it. I already called our police contact. Police contact? I asked, frowning. I'll explain tonight, she said. For now, take photos of every document they've given you, and don't touch those flags in the yard. We need them as evidence. 2 hours later, a knock at my door revealed Mark, Sue, and 5 other neighbors, all holding HOA notices of their own. They got me too, Mark said, shaking his head. They're saying my flagpole is a structural violation. They're trying to force me to remove my grandson's wheelchair ramp, Walt whispered, his hands trembling. Jess's voice cracked as she held up her notice. They told me they're putting a lien on my house. I can't fight this, I work 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Charlie arrived a few minutes later, stepping inside with a police officer right behind her. Everyone, this is Detective Lawson, she announced. He's here to take statements about the illegal towing and harassment. Lawson nodded, flipping open his notebook. We've received multiple complaints about this HOA in recent weeks, he said. I'd like to hear from each of you. While the officer gathered reports, Charlie connected her laptop to my TV and pulled up a spreadsheet. I've been tracking every violation notice in this neighborhood for the past 2 weeks, she explained. The screen filled with dates, addresses, fine amounts, and photos. 93 violations issued in 14 days, she continued. That's compared to 37 violations in the entire previous year. She clicked to another screen displaying a map of Pine Crest Gardens. Houses were marked in different colors, red for those with over 5 violations, yellow for homes recently sold. A pattern became painfully clear. They're creating a domino effect, Charlie explained. Force one homeowner out, then target their neighbors until Westbridge can buy up an entire connected section of properties. A heavy silence settled over the room. Walt cleared his throat. So what do we do? Charlie's eyes gleamed. We document everything and we fight back. Just then, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Greg standing there with 2 men in private security uniforms. We're here to collect your outstanding fines, he announced, his voice louder than necessary, as if he wanted the entire neighborhood to hear. Plus the new $500 penalty for operating a business in a residential property. I blinked. Business? Greg smirked. Unauthorized meetings, he said, gesturing at the cars parked outside. Clear violation of residential zoning. Before I could speak, Detective Lawson stepped up behind me. Is there a problem here? Greg's face went pale. This is a private HOA matter. Lawson flipped his notepad closed. Actually, I'm investigating multiple complaints of harassment and fraud. He gave Greg a hard stare. "And I'd like your full name for my report." Greg backed away. I'll need to consult our attorney." Charlie stepped forward, slipping a business card into his hand. "Excellent idea," she said smoothly. "And while you're at it, tell your lawyer that Lockhart and Montgomery will be filing a subpoena in the morning." Greg stared at the card. Then at her. His face turned ghostly white. The next morning, I woke up to pounding on my front door. Not a polite knock, a demanding, urgent thudding that sent a spike of adrenaline through my system. Still groggy, I threw on a hoodie and stumbled downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw Victoria Dawson, standing on my porch with Greg Whitman, 2 HOA board members I barely recognized, and 2 men in black uniforms with Summit Security Solutions patches, the HOA's private security force. "Open up, HOA business," Victoria called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm as I unlocked the door. Victoria pushed past me before I could even say good morning, her expensive perfume filling my hallway like an invasion. The others followed, moving into my house as if they had every right to be there. "We have evidence of an unauthorized resident and an illegal neighborhood meeting held on these premises," Victoria announced, flipping open a thick folder stuffed with papers. "Your fines now total $1,500, due today." I blinked, still shaking off sleep. "You can't just barge in here." Greg adjusted his glasses, practically vibrating with excitement. "Actually, Section 17B of the HOA Covenant gives us emergency access rights when there's suspected rule-breaking," he recited proudly. "We've documented everything." One of the security guards, a tall man with a military-style buzz cut, moved beside Victoria, his hand resting near his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as cold as steel, "we need to speak with the unauthorized occupant immediately." Upstairs, I heard the creak of floorboards. "Charlie." I swallowed hard and called up the staircase. "Charlie, wake up." When she appeared at the top of the stairs, her oversized t-shirt rumpled from sleep, Victoria's eyes narrowed in satisfaction. "What's happening?" Charlie asked, voice groggy but laced with that lawyer's edge. The second security guard, a shorter but broader man, stepped forward, blocking the bottom of the staircase. "Are you the individual residing here without HOA approval?" Charlie's brows lifted. "I'm visiting my sister," she said calmly, though I saw the calculated shift in her posture, her mind clicking into legal mode. "And you have no authority to interrogate me in a private home." Greg smirked and tapped his tablet screen. Section 4C clearly states guests may not stay longer than 5 consecutive nights without board approval. It's been 14 days. Charlie crossed her arms. "You've been counting?" Greg didn't blink. "The fine is now $2,500, due immediately, or we begin eviction proceedings on Monday." I felt sick. Charlie, however, only smiled. "Let me see your authorization documents for this visit," she said, "and the credentials for these security personnel." The air in the room changed instantly. Victoria's mask cracked. "We don't need to show you anything," she snapped. "You're not a resident." Charlie took another step down. "I'm asking as an attorney." She let the words hang. "You entered a private home at dawn with armed personnel. Show me your legal basis." The tall guard shifted uncomfortably and looked at Victoria, clearly unsure. Victoria regained her composure quickly. "Wake up, sweetheart," she cooed. "You're in my neighborhood. I make the rules." Then she nodded at the shorter security guard. He reached for Charlie's arm. "You need to step back, ma'am." Charlie flinched away, her hands raised. "Do not touch me." The moment hung, frozen, then the buzz-cut guard unclipped his taser. And fired. The clicking sound and Charlie's scream merged into one terrible noise as her body jerked violently and collapsed against the staircase. I lunged forward with a cry, dropping to my knees beside her. Her hands trembled, body still twitching from the shock. "What have you done?" I screamed. "Call an ambulance." Victoria stood over us, arms crossed, watching with detached amusement. "This is what happens," she said, voice dripping with false sympathy, "when people don't respect our community standards." My hand scrambled for my phone. 911. "My sister's been tasered in my home by HOA security," I gasped. "We need police and an ambulance." The guards exchanged nervous glances. Greg's smirk disappeared. The shorter security guard, Brent Maddox, took a step back. She was resisting. A movement at the window caught my eye. My neighbor Sarah stood outside, phone held up, recording everything. She nodded once, letting me know she had the entire incident on camera. Victoria realized it too late. Her eyes widened. From somewhere behind me, a siren wailed. I gripped Charlie's hand as the red and blue lights flashed through the window. The moment the first officer stepped inside, I pointed at Brent. "That man tasered my sister in her own home. Arrest him." Victoria opened her mouth, but Detective Lawson beat her to it. "You," he snapped, jabbing a finger at Brent. "Hands where I can see them." Brent paled. "I was following HOA orders." "You're not a cop," Lawson interrupted. "You're a security guard who just assaulted a civilian." Victoria tried again. "This is an HOA matter." "This is a felony, Victoria." Lawson's voice was ice. "And you're under investigation." Greg backed toward the door. I think I should talk to our lawyer." Charlie, still wincing, propped herself up on her elbows and gave him a small, pain-laced smile. "Oh, you should." The officer beside Lawson pulled out handcuffs. Brent turned pale as they snapped around his wrists. As he was led out the door, Sarah sent the video to every single person in our neighborhood group chat. Victoria's phone buzzed violently. She looked down at it. Her face drained of color. By the time they loaded Charlie into the ambulance, my phone was blowing up with messages from neighbors. Then I saw it. A news alert. Someone had already sent the video to Channel 7. HOA security guard tasers woman over parking violation in suburban nightmare. It was happening. Victoria had no idea that her entire empire was about to collapse. Victoria Dawson had always operated like a queen presiding over her kingdom, ruling Pine Crest Gardens with an iron grip, confident that she was untouchable. But when the video of Charlie being tasered hit the news, the cracks in her empire spread like wildfire. By the time Charlie was discharged from the hospital, the footage had already been viewed over 500,000 times online. Our neighborhood group chat exploded with outrage. "I just saw the news. That was in our neighborhood? HOA security did what? Are they even allowed to have tasers? That could have been my daughter. We need to get rid of these psychopaths." Victoria tried to do damage control. She called an emergency HOA meeting, no doubt hoping to regain control of the narrative. We were already one step ahead of her. The night of the meeting, we arrived early. Not just me and Charlie, but over 50 neighbors, including Mark, Sue, Jess, and Walt. Detective Lawson showed up, too. The community center was packed. Victoria stood at the front of the room, her smile forced, her posture stiff. Beside her, Greg looked like he was about to throw up. "Before we begin," she announced, gripping the podium, "I want to remind everyone that we must maintain order and follow our HOA guidelines." A wave of muttered curses and laughter rippled through the room. Charlie leaned toward me. "She's nervous." I smirked. "She should be." Victoria cleared her throat. Due to recent events, the HOA board has voted to designate Pine Crest Gardens as a restricted community, meaning all legal action against the board will be subject to internal review before being escalated. Charlie tilted her head. Did she just say what I think she said? Mark stood up. Are you saying we can't take legal action against you? Victoria smiled, but it was more like a baring of teeth. All disputes will be handled internally so that we may resolve issues in a productive manner. This is a standard procedure for keeping our community safe. A woman in the back scoffed. Safe? Your security guards tasered someone. The room erupted. Greg stood up so fast his chair tipped over. The board has determined that this community needs stronger regulations to prevent unruly behavior. Charlie finally spoke, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. You mean like falsifying fines? Or hiring an unlicensed security firm? Or illegally using HOA funds for personal gain? Victoria stiffened. We will not tolerate baseless accusations. Charlie smiled and tapped her laptop, connecting it to the projector. Then let's review the facts. The screen filled with a spreadsheet detailing every HOA fine issued over the past 6 months. The room fell silent. Charlie gestured at the numbers. Since Victoria took over, violations have increased by 300%. But that's not the real kicker. The properties with the most fines? All next to houses recently sold to Westbridge Property Group. Gasps rippled through the room. Charlie clicked again. Emails appeared on the screen. One of them was from Victoria to a Westbridge executive. We have a few more properties lined up for acquisition. The board is ensuring compliance pressure forces sales before the next fiscal quarter. Victoria's face turned ghost white. What the hell? Someone muttered. Did she just admit to forcing people out? Jess's voice shook with anger. Charlie clicked once more, pulling up financial statements from HOA accounts. And if you thought that was bad, you should see where your dues have been going. The next slide showed payments labeled as maintenance expenses, but instead of paying for park upkeep, that money had been transferred to a Westbridge development slush fund. The room exploded. Charlie turned back to Victoria, who was now visibly shaking. Would you like to explain why over $300,000 of HOA funds are unaccounted for? Greg shot to his feet. I didn't know about any of this. Charlie pushed a stack of documents across the table. Greg, your signature is on half of these. Greg bolted for the door. Lawson stepped forward. Sit down. Greg froze. Detective Lawson, is this even legal? Walt's voice trembled with rage. Lawson nodded toward the financial records. Fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property acquisitions? Oh yeah, this is very illegal. Victoria finally snapped. You don't understand, she shrieked. We were building something better. You think this is some kind of conspiracy? This neighborhood was a mess before I took over. I gave it structure. Order. You stole from us, Jess spat. You tried to ruin people's lives. Victoria's mask cracked. Her breathing turned ragged as she clutched the podium, desperate to regain control. None of this matters, she hissed. You still have to pay your fines. The board has legal authority. Charlie smiled, and this time, it was wicked. Actually, she said, you don't. She turned the screen to one final document. It was a court order freezing the HOA's authority. As of this morning, Charlie said smoothly, the state attorney general has frozen all HOA activities pending investigation. Meaning you have no legal power here anymore. The room erupted in cheers. Victoria's eyes darted around wildly, looking for an escape. Then she turned and ran. Lawson motioned to his officers. Go get her. Victoria made it as far as the parking lot before they tackled her to the pavement. As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, she screamed, "I made this community. You can't do this to me." Charlie and I stepped outside, watching as she was dragged toward a squad car. She twisted her neck to look at us, her face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," she spat. Charlie arched an eyebrow. "It is for you." As the squad car's door slammed shut, I let out a long, slow breath. For the first time in months, it felt like I could finally breathe. The HOA was finished. The neighborhood was ours again. But the best part? Victoria had no idea that in less than 24 hours, the FBI was about to start digging into Westbridge's corruption. She thought this was rock bottom. She had no idea how much further she was about to fall. The next morning, Victoria Dawson's house was empty. The queen of Pinecrest Gardens, the woman who once ruled with an iron fist, was now just another criminal in handcuffs. News crews swarmed the neighborhood, cameras rolling as reporters detailed her arrest and the massive real estate fraud she had orchestrated. The headlines were brutal. HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar corruption scandal. Illegal HOA fines exposed, hundreds of residents affected. Westbridge Property Group under federal investigation. Charlie and I watched from my porch as neighbors gathered in the cul-de-sac, reading the latest updates on their phones, shaking their heads in disbelief. "They stole $300,000 from us," Walt muttered. "And they thought we'd just roll over." Mark let out a satisfied chuckle. "Well, they rolled straight into a prison cell, so I'd say karma handled that one." Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread like wildfire. The HOA board was dissolved, every illegal fine was refunded, and Westbridge Property Group collapsed overnight after their stock plummeted from the scandal. Their CEO, Richard Calloway, was indicted alongside Victoria, Greg, and several city officials who had been caught fast-tracking zoning approvals in exchange for bribes. But the best part? The $4.8 million class action lawsuit we won against the HOA and Westbridge. Every single homeowner who had been scammed, harassed, or fined unfairly got their money back, with interest. As for Victoria, she tried to cut a deal, but the evidence was airtight. The last time I saw her, she was being escorted into the courthouse in an orange jumpsuit, her once perfectly styled hair a tangled mess. She refused to make eye contact as Charlie and I walked past her, victorious. With the settlement funds, our neighborhood transformed overnight. The playground was renovated, the pool repaired, and the community center rebuilt, this time, without an HOA board controlling it. On the night of our first ever HOA-free block party, we stood around the grill, neighbors laughing and sharing drinks, kids running through the grass without fear of a violation notice. Charlie leaned against the fence, watching the families enjoy the new sense of freedom. "So," I said, nudging her. "You moving back to your place now that this is over?" She smirked. "Nope." I frowned. "What do you mean, nope?" She took a sip of her drink, then pointed across the street. "At Victoria Dawson's old house." The sold sign gleamed under the streetlights. "You're joking," I whispered. Charlie grinned. "I just closed on it this morning. Full price. And guess what?" She clinked her glass against mine. "No HOA." Laughter bubbled out of me before I could stop it. Victoria would hate this. And that, more than anything, made it perfect. Looking around at my neighbors, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about fighting back against an overreaching HOA. It was about standing up for what was right. About proving that when people come together, even the biggest bullies can fall. So tell me, have you ever been targeted by a power-hungry HOA or a Karen who thought they ran the world? Share your experience below, let's see who had it worse.